For the first show of Winter 25 that I'll be talking about, and the first of the comfy shows that I'm watching this season, we have Okitsura. Fell in love with an Okinawan girl, but I just wish that I knew what she was saying, which from now on I'll be referring to as Okitsura, as that is a very long title. So I'm a decent fan of the show so far, finding it to be a pretty wholesome and interesting time. Its truly unique aspect is its dedicated focus on Okinawa, which is a double-edged sword that will be effective or ineffective based on your interests. I'm thoroughly enjoying its approach to educating on Okinawan culture, with the comedy and the romance working decently well within it, while also providing an interesting look into the culture, as someone who knows very little about it. But I recognize that the things that work for me can be unappealing to a lot of people, getting into the double-edged sword part. And while I am enjoying it, I don't think it's exactly anything spectacular. So if this is your first time seeing a first impressions of mine, for these I give my thoughts on an anime airing during the current season based on the first 3 episodes. There will not be any spoilers for specific scenes in this one, but I do get into general themes and trends of the show, as well as discuss the characters. And do keep in mind that first impressions are just that, first impressions. A short summary of this is that the main character, Nakamura Teraraki, moves from Tokyo to Okinawa. He has a crush on Kyan Hina, but she often speaks in an Okinawan dialect of Japanese and as well as traditional Okinawan language. As such, he can't understand a lot of what she says. So Higa Kana, who has a crush on Teru and is Hina's friend, often translates when she is around. And so you know who the characters are. Got another image on screen. Teru is watching Hina point at the best character in the show, who is Kana. With these 3, we have your standard youth anime type love triangle, but with the language barrier and Okinawan culture being the thing that their dynamic is largely centered around. A lot of this show's comedy comes from miscommunication humor, with Teru missing out on things Hina says and having to piece things together using context clues, usually around some piece of information around Okinawan culture and history and stuff like that, and him having no idea and having to make assumptions, or Kana has to translate, etc. I personally don't have a problem with this, the miscommunication humor, as it's what the show is going for. That's the type of comedy that it's aiming to do. I get the reason behind it, and I think it works for me. I am not a huge fan of miscommunication humor in general, but here I think it's done in a way that I like. It has in-universe context for why it's happening, rather than being forced, like it very, very often is in anime, especially in high school romances and stuff like that. Like a character listening in on a conversation and then running away right before someone says something that would clarify what the real meaning is or the context or whatever. So not understanding local dialects, even the language you know, is a very real thing across the world. And so far at least, it has not done it in a dramatic way that actually has consequences. It really is just for humor. But it does take this language communication pretty far in terms of the show. There are times when like the official subs, for example, will genuinely not tell you what Hana is saying. This is intentional for comedic effect and to put you more in the perspective of Teru not understanding her dialect. I like the way that it goes about this, but I can see this bothering other people who are not as invested in the main premise as I am. Some people really don't like not knowing what someone's saying, even if it's purposeful. So I am not one of those people, but I could understand this being grating for those types of people. And fundamentally, it is true that non-Japanese speakers will not be able to connect with this as well as Japanese speakers would, due to Japanese language being the basis of some of this humor, because it's about how it's different from normal Japanese language. I still think you can enjoy it despite this, if it appeals to you. Like, I do not have a good level of Japanese, I'm very much a beginner right now, but I personally am still enjoying this a lot. But I wouldn't expect a lot of people to be able to get over this hurdle. I just understand how it could be a downside. So not to say that anyone's lesser for it if you can't Like, if you can't enjoy this, I'm not saying you're not a true weeb or you have to be more of an intellectual who enjoys the nuances of language and stuff like that. I'm not trying to degrade anyone or trying to make myself sound like I'm awesome just because I enjoy it. I just think that one's cultural and linguistic interest probably needs to be a little bit higher than the average, like, non-Japanese speaking anime fan would be to enjoy this. If that makes sense, that's all I'm trying to say. So while I enjoy this aspect of the show, I completely understand that its heavy focus on the Japanese language can be too much for some people, and why some people would not enjoy it for that. So I already mentioned it before, but when it comes to the main characters, Kana is absolutely my favorite of the trio. I think she's very cute and she's really likable. She's the one who's really the engaging character when it comes to the romance. The other two, they're not necessarily boring or unpleasant characters, but again, speaking just for the first 3 episodes, I wish I had a better idea of who they are as people outside of just the basic traits of, being a kind, solid, decent person, which with this sort of comfy series is generally the default. These types of Yashike type shows, cute slice of life, generally everyone is nice. You could say that it feels like the comedic dynamic between them takes precedent over them as characters. Hina in particular, I think, didn't really have a lot going for her so far, outside of being energetic and being speaking Okinawan and being knowledgeable about Okinawan culture, despite being the love interest of the main character. I hope as we get further in, she will be more fleshed out as a character. This could be intentional though, as it could put us more in the perspective of Teru, who struggles to fully understand her due to the language barrier. And that love can often happen before truly understanding someone, which is a more mature angle this show could get into if it wanted to. But maybe that's coping. This one does feel like it could be intended for a bit younger of an audience than the average anime would be, but if that's the case, I don't think it's hampering my enjoyment of the good vibes. If someone who likes good vibes, this show provides that. The heart of this anime is lovingly embracing and simultaneously poking fun at the unique aspects of Okinawan culture. Okinawan culture plays into every single facet of this series, from the setting, situations, gags, character dynamics, everything. Educating the viewer on Okinawan culture is at the forefront of this series, at least based on the first 3 episodes. It even has a counter for educational memos they give, where they explain certain cultural aspects of Okinawa in focus that's relevant to that particular scene. And also, I genuinely really enjoy these. I don't think it does it in an overly preachy or like a lecture-y kind of way, as it usually comes naturally from the situations that Teru is put in and what they talk about. Generally, these things are pretty funny and interesting. Again, I'm someone I like learning about culture and stuff like that, so to me, this works. If you don't, you might not. This focus on explaining the culture is one reason why I can understand it being unpopular and having lower ratings among those who watched it. This definitely appeals to more niche audiences than the average anime fan, in my opinion, as far as I can see. Okinawan culture is the core of this show. It's not just a gimmick to give standard rom-com shenanigans something to work around. It's much more substantial than that. If you have no interest in learning about Okinawa, I will say not to bother with this one. The rom-com side of it's present and it's serviceable, but the characters don't stand all that strong separately from the premise of Okinawan language, culture, history, etc. The characters aren't bad, but outside of Kana, I don't have strong feelings towards the other 2 of the main trio. I really like the cultural focus, so this doesn't bother me. If you have an interest in Okinawa for one reason or another, such as wanting to go there or live there, people you live there, or if you're simply curious about cultures and history that you don't know about, which is the camp that I'm in, I recommend you give it a shot. This gives you a lot of interesting information in generally funny ways. So, if Yashike is your thing, then I think the show can give you that positive feeling that you look for. seeing these characters enthralled in their cultural background and the quirks of the place that they live is genuinely really nice. And this being a pretty remote area on an island, it also goes for the appreciation of simple things like nature, food, and community to solid effect. From a visual standpoint, I think the show actually looks pretty great. The characters tend to have great expressions, and the lighting in particular is especially great. Series that are going for the beauty of nature and that sort of vibe, such as this show, need to be properly portraying these things. You can fail to say, look how beautiful this area is, if the visual quality is poor enough that it doesn't actually look beautiful. It's the same reason why food-focused anime usually makes the food look gorgeous. It's meant to beautify it. Thankfully here, I think Okitsura does a good job, making the environment around there very pretty, and also making the food, because you learn a lot about their specific local food, look very tasty as well. And there's a lot of creativity with how subtitles are used in the show. And when I talk about subtitles, I don't mean like translated subtitles. I mean Japanese subtitles that are actually integrated directly into the show, not like subtitles added after. Sometimes it can be a lot, but it can also look pretty nice and accentuate gags and follow dialogue very well. So overall, I like this aspect of it. Kind of makes it have a little more energy, a little more visual flair. And one very specific thing I want to bring up that this show does end up hitting on a little bit, and it fundamentally kind of has to because it's actually portraying how Okinawan people look. I've noticed, being an anime fan and weeb for years now, is that some people genuinely don't know that Japanese people can have darker skin tones. Like when people thought Nagatoro from Don't Mess With Me Nagatoro was meant to be like a black stereotype just because she has a tan. Whether because of their biology, giving them a darker skin tone naturally, whether they're getting tan from the climate or their activities making them spend more time outside, like Nagatoro, almost all the characters in this show have a darker skin tone, outside of Terror. If this show can help people understand this idea, then it is also doing a service on this front. I'm not trying to get into racial politics or anything. I just want people to understand the fact that Japanese people can have darker skin tones naturally, and this show is proof of that. That's all I'm trying to say. So, to conclude, I think that Okitsura is not anything spectacular like, oh, it's some hidden gem that you gotta watch. But I think for my tastes, I think it's a very enjoyable show. I think the language and culture-based humor works, and I appreciate how it presents Okinawan culture in a way that is educational, but also flowing very naturally within the show, while also being pretty funny. As a rom-com, it is really nothing to write home about, but it works well enough with the main premise for me to not really think it's truly boring or anything along those lines. So, I'll say in terms of whether I recommend someone to give it a shot. If you like wholesome slice of life shows, give it a shot. If you're interested in learning more about like a subset of Japanese culture, then I also say give it a shot. If you're not looking for those two things, then I would say I think you're fine skipping out on it. If you're just a fan of rom-coms in general, you can give it a try, but I don't think it's going to be offering anything especially amazing or different outside of just the premise of the language barrier between them. And with that, this one comes to a close. I'll have more first impressions videos coming out soon, and you can check out my website if you want to read the other first impressions I have up already, if you want to read those right now, and see anything on there that will be exclusive to my website. Or if you just want to subscribe and like and all that stuff here, that is also greatly appreciated. Thank you very much.